Yeah, well, wanted to start. You're in Madrid this week. Were you covering the games?
Yeah, I was there Tuesday night, Wednesday night, just for City Atletico, which was all quite a nice and easy night of work until it all went pear shaped at the end
Yeah,
and melees and brawls and fighting in the tunnel. But it was interesting, an interesting game.
yeah. I'm sure it was a fun one to cover at the end of that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it was those Champions League nights are great. There's always a lot to get stuck into, even if it's 0-0.
yeah, well, hopefully we'll be back watching some intense ones again, rather than the. We could use a little bit of fighting and brawling during the our match with Atletico. I can say that for sure. Um, so the big story, obviously, with United now. You and Mark Ogden and ESPN seemingly broke open the Ten Hag deal last week, and kind of confirming that United had selected him as the next manager. And wanted to first kind of ask you, how did this happen? While United seemingly weren't saying anything at all, and still are kind of not saying anything at all. How did this kind of come about that you guys got this deal?
Yeah, I mean it's a combination of things really. It's about talking to different people at United and people who are around Eric Ten Hag and his agency. Obviously, it's difficult to get the club to tell you definitively yes, because ultimately they want to be the ones to announce the deal. Obviously, it's a massive deal to break, and you'll know that United are very in tune with their engagement on social media and all that kind of thing. So they do want to be the first to kind of confirm it. But these things, there are an awful lot of people involved in these kind of things on both sides. It's not a situation where it's just one man or two men in a room thrashing out a deal. There's an awful lot of people who are involved, and people get to know about negotiations and how they're going and which direction it's heading. And then you just got to trust the people that you're speaking to, I guess. I mean, you know, you won't find a journalist who hasn't got one of these stories wrong at some point. That's the nature of the business, whether it's transfer stories or manager stories or anything like that. You just have to make sure that you're speaking to people that you trust, and that when you have information that you think is right, that you do it in the right way. And then I guess it's just hoping that you are right, because you're never actually going to know until United announce it themselves, or you see a picture of Eric Ten Hag at Old Trafford with a scarf or a shirt. Ultimately it's still up in the air. So yeah, it's a nice one to get. Obviously, we're just waiting now for the confirmation.
Yeah, it seems like a really interesting process. I'm very curious because even as far from last November up until I would say even, a month or 2 months ago, the very clear favorite was Pochettino. I'm really curious what you've heard about what factors ended up leading to Ten Hag over Poch and what caused the shift.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We've been here with Pochettino a number of times over the years. When Jose was sacked, and then when Ollie was in trouble at various stages. There was a stage when Solskjaer was in trouble, and I think that Pochettino had just left Spurs and was unemployed. So there was, United have considered him, more than once over the years, and there are still people at Old Trafford that rate him very highly and would like him to become the next manager. Um, I mean, it's a good question, the one that you asked, because ultimately, in terms of CV, you could argue that Pochettino is a better fit. That it depends on what you rate as the key values that you want in a new manager. Um, I think one of the important things was that the strength of feeling against Pochettino after PSG went out of the Champions League to Real Madrid, I think really caught United by surprise. And it's important to say that United have denied that fan sentiment like that has swayed the decision in any way. But it was around that time where Ten Hag became, for them, the clear favourite. I mean, there are other things in play there, like there are people at United who like that Ten Hag they believe has got a more clearly defined style of play. The key phrase that people behind the scenes have used is that he is out of the candidates who were looked at, he was the best fit into the structure that they have at Old Trafford already. Um, there is a sense that perhaps Pochettino is a little bit more political behind the scenes than Ten Hag, maybe, which is, is probably not a huge factor for fans, but is a big factor for the club. So all these things have kind of have played into leading Ten Hag to become the main candidate. I mean, there is this kind of narrative around Ten Hag that he's this up and coming young manager, but it's not really the case because he's older than Pep Guardiola. I think perhaps what people at United feel is that it's a risk, but the potential upside, if that risk comes off, the ceiling for Ten Hag is higher than perhaps the ceiling is for Pochettino. And ultimately, only time will tell with that. It would be very easy for me to sit here and say, I think they've got the right man. He's going to be great. But ultimately, no one knows. You're all United fans, and you'll know that I'm sure at different stages with different managers, you've been very excited about the manager coming in, and for whatever reasons, it hasn't worked out. And so, as I say, time will tell whether it's the right choice or not. We may well be sat here in a year's time saying, wasn't it a shame that Ten Hag didn't work out? What about Pochettino?
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? You can definitely see that happen as a United fan. Obviously, with you guys breaking the Ten Hag news, I know it's not been fully confirmed yet, but still, a lot of people have been talking about who you might bring in regard to coaching. So, like his assistant manager and other coaches. We've seen a lot of reports from many different journalists for the likes of Randy Muhlenstein, obviously the former United coach under Ferguson, as well as like Ruud van Nistelrooy, even Steve McLaren, and his current assistant, Mitchell van der Gaag. Have you heard anything on who might join Ten Hag at United? Because I don't think anyone really properly knows, do they, currently?
No, I mean, I think he would like to bring his assistant in from Ajax. I think that's fairly well known. The difficulty with that is that he's under contract with Ajax in the same way that Ten Hag is, and it would be a separate negotiation. The issue with backroom staff is it has become a problem in the past when United have hired managers about how many staff they're allowed, who those staff are, how easy it is to bring those staff in. I know Ralf Ragnick was a little bit annoyed that he was kind of limited in the staff that he could bring in, and the names that were mentioned by him initially were not ones who eventually arrived. He would never throw his assistants under the bus, but I think if he's honest, he didn't get the assistants or the staff in that he actually wanted in the first instance. So it's very difficult because obviously Erik Ten Hag, when he is confirmed, will be the main man. But all these managers have these backroom staff teams behind them that they consider to be very, very important. And it becomes an issue for United in that you're not just hiring one man, you're hiring, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's quite a big investment. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly common knowledge that he would like to bring his assistant from Ajax. That there has been talk of other names that you've mentioned there. I think he would like someone with links to the Premier League who's been there and done it, and also who has been at United and who understands the way the club functions, and can maybe act as a kind of a bridge to the squad or even to the fans. Whether that happens or not is another question. I mean, there's been talk of Robin van Persie, but there are issues there around his work permit. So it's not as easy as sort of saying I'm taking you, and you, and we're all going together. It's why these processes take so long, and it's I know there's an awful lot of frustration sometimes among the fan base when decisions that they think should be fairly simple take a long time to do, and I completely understand that because it's really important that this gets done quickly. It's just not that simple. Even things like Van Persie, I mean, that makes sense to me in terms of he's been at United, he knows the Premier League, his communication skills are said to be quite good, but it's just not that simple in terms of work permits and things. It can be quite tough with regard to that. So we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, it is something that Ten Hag has negotiated with United. I mean, it's something that United are well aware that he wants to bring his own team in. It'll just be about getting the names that he wants in as soon as possible, because it really is vital that gets sorted quickly, as well as the confirmation as the manager, because there is no time to waste. They need to be in a position to start the summer with everyone in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that it's been sort of you mentioned it there, which is a good lead into the next question, because the subject of coaching has been an issue. Obviously, when Rangnick joined, he might not have expected Michael Carrick, McKenna, Martin Pert all to leave all at once. And I think really we'd be better off probably if they hadn't left at that time. And, the coaching, while nice people. Chris Armas seems like a nice and intelligent guy. He doesn't have really the experience at this level of football. I know that Ralph maybe would have brought someone in if he could have, like Jesse Marsh, who obviously is coaching Leeds now. So and doing quite well. So obviously he's someone who might have had some experience there. But that leads to the question then. I guess that's why United fans and us are so particular on the questions of who's coming in as coach, because would you agree that the lack of those coaches who've been there all year and the whole departure and lack of experience is probably a bit of what's happened to the team and the club this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly an issue around the coaching. Obviously you'll know that Solskjaer was not particularly hands-on in terms of day-to-day training ground stuff. He delegated an awful lot of that to Carrick and to Kieran McKenna. I think it was a real shame that Michael Carrick left when he did. I think for all of them, they probably felt that they'd been tarred by the same brush as Solskjaer, and that it looked a little bit odd in that the results had been so poor, and Solskjaer was the only one to lose his job. And that I think those coaches had looked at the situation and thought, well, is there any way really to recover our reputations here? Because at the time, lots of the fans were kind of holding them to account as well, and wondering why they had stayed on when Solskjaer had been quite hands off and he was the one to lose his job. I think Carrick in particular was quite a big loss to Ralf Rangnick. Maybe things would have been a little bit different if he had stayed. And you're right to raise the issue of coaching, because it is important, and it's something that has been quite keenly felt by a few of the players, not just over the last couple of years, but stretching back beyond Solskjaer, that they don't feel that they have been in a position to develop as a player in the way that perhaps players have been seen to get much better under someone like Klopp or Pep Guardiola. Lots of the young players that they've signed, and it's great that United are looking to sign young, hungry players, but they're not the finished article. They need regular world-class coaching to get the best out of them, and so they can reach their potential. Which is why it's so important that Erik Ten Hag gets the right men. I mean, from what we understand, Ten Hag will be a lot more hands-on on the training pitch than perhaps Solskjaer. He's developed two very good teams at Ajax, and lots of the players who have played for him would credit him in particular with helping them become better players. And I think if that is replicated at Old Trafford, that will remove one of the big problems that has been at Old Trafford for a couple of years now. You'll get players like Marcus Rashford, who has got all the ability in the world, but has probably lacked a little bit of top level coaching, a little bit of focus on the training pitch. Whether that's getting him to focus on one particular position or honing a certain skill or just making him a better player, because he's at that stage of his career now where he really needs to kick on and become the player that we all hope he can be. So it'll be very important for Ten Hag to get the right coaches in, for him to be able to get his message across very quickly, because it has been a problem, and I'm sure lots of United fans will look at the players who arrived at City and Liverpool and wonder why United can't do the same with the players that they've signed, because lots of the players that United have signed haven't really moved forward. I mean, Aaron Wan-Bissaka is a case in point. He has the potential. I think he has the bare tools to be a very, very good player, but he's the same player now than he was when he signed. He hasn't got any better, in my opinion, and that's a shame because he's cost an awful lot of money. That's the kind of thing that needs rectified, and it makes a big difference. It's all very well me sitting here and saying they need to sign a lot of players, but if you can get 20-30% more out of Rashford, Wan-Bissaka, you improve Harry Maguire, all these players, you suddenly become a much better team without having to sign anyone, and half your job's done. That really is the kind of thing that Erik Ten Hag is going to have to address straight away.
Yeah, that all definitely makes sense. That's what I'm hoping for, the Ten Hag appointment. But with Ten Hag being appointed, that means Ralf Radnick's going to be leaving his managerial post and going upstairs. Obviously, there's been a lot of question marks around what even is his consultancy role. Like, is he going to be helping the director of football? Is he just going to be another voice? Have you heard anything going forward into summer? Because I don't think anyone really properly knows, do they? Like, what Ralf Rangnick's going to be doing at United for the next 2 years at least.
No, and it's my opinion is that it's been fudged a little bit, to be honest. Around the time that Solskjaer was under pressure, Ralf Rangnick's name came up as someone who was considered to be a viable candidate to be interim manager if the time came that Solskjaer was sacked. Around the time that he was sacked, around that Watford game, it was made quite clear by people around Radnick that he was flattered, but he had a great job in Russia, and that why would he leave that for a 6-month stint in charge of United? Obviously, that changed very quickly, and the thing that changed is that there was this 2-year consultancy added on at the end. Obviously, fair play to Ralf. He wants to secure his own future. He wants to work, and wasn't prepared to leave Russia just for a 6-month job and then be unemployed at the end of the season. And he negotiated the consultancy role on top of that. The issue from the very start of that was that it was just a very, very grey area almost immediately. No one could really tell you what it was going to be doing, how it would work in terms of the structure at United. Would he be above John Murtough? Would he be advising John Murtough? Would he be a similar level to, say, Darren Fletcher? Would he have influence over Darren Fletcher? All these questions went unanswered, and even in his unveiling at Old Trafford, one of the first questions was, it's congratulations, you're the new manager, but when this all ends, what are you going to be doing day to day? And even Ralf couldn't really answer it. He kind of blustered his way through it a little bit. There have been stories about him only working 6 days a month, and that, as it stands, is true. That United aren't denying that it will be a very loose arrangement. He has offered his advice to the board already about what should happen to the players already in the squad. Possible transfer targets they should look at. He's been kept informed about the manager process, if not, actually consulted and asked his opinion about the direction that they should go. And it is very loose, and it doesn't help the perception of Man United. I don't think for an awful long time people have looked at United and thought the club off the field is a mess. There's no defined structure. You don't know who's making the decisions. You don't know who's advising who is making the final choice on transfer targets and things like that. And I don't think this helps at all. I thought it was a step in the right direction that you hired John Murtough and Darren Fletcher in those specific roles. I mean, you can argue whether they are qualified for those roles, and I think that's a valid argument. But at least those roles are now in place. But now that's been muddied a little bit, because at the end of the season, Ralf Rangnick is going to leave his caretaker job and he's going to be advising someone somewhere about something without any real clear definition about what any of that's going to entail. And I just don't think it helps. I know I came on the podcast before and I pointed at City and say, look, they are a very, very well-run club. They've got a very clearly defined structure. They've got an empowered director of football who advises the manager, very clearly defined boundaries between all those different roles. And it works. And, United don't seem to have that at the moment. And I think that's one of the problems that needs to be sorted, because, with the best will in the world, Erik Ten Hag is a good coach and has done very well at Ajax, but it's getting to the point where United could hire anyone and anyone would struggle in that job, because it's such a tough job, because the structure off the field is not right. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Ralf, whether it's one of those things that kind of just slowly disappears, that you don't hear anything about him, you don't see him at Old Trafford, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's gone and taken another job. Because at the moment we've asked and asked and asked the people who should know, and you cannot get a clear answer about what actually his consultancy is going to look like.
Yeah, it's been very strange, that whole thing. And you would expect that if he, like you said, if he left his job in Russia, that he would have had some guarantees that post interim he would have a more secure job, but it just doesn't seem like that's been the case.